right, welcome everyone. Glad to see so many folks joining the webinar today. My name is Tom Casari. I'm a principal sales engineer here at Harness. I've been at Harness for just about 4 years. Previously a developer myself, so I have a lot of experience in some of the challenges that if you're a developer, are potentially facing. I've come over to this side. I've been in these types of roles for many years, helping solve for those challenges. And again, happy to be chatting with you today about this great topic. I hope everyone is hopefully out and not dealing with some of the weather challenges. Today's session was going to be a little bit more conversational, but because of travel issues with the weather, it's caused a little bit of a change to the format. So I will, do this more on my own. We'll start off with a discussion of the challenges that people deal with today in this space. We'll then demo the solution that many organizations are using to solve for those challenges. And just as a recap, this session is for really anyone who's involved in the SDLC. So this can include developers, it can include platform teams, DevOps, infrastructure, security, basically anyone who may be involved there. At the end of this, hopefully you'll have a better understanding around standardizing and automating the delivery of CI/CD pipelines and scaffolding services in general with easy to use self-service workflows. So what we're going to show at this, and we're going to talk about, is how do we turn new service onboarding, and really any developer-oriented workflows in general, into something repeatable and scalable instead of being reactive and chaotic. Now, before we get into the session, I'd love to understand who we have in the audience. So we actually have a poll for the audience just to get that understanding. So start that poll. I'd love to see who we have in the audience today, specifically the types of roles. So we'll give everyone a couple of minutes to jump in and respond. Awesome. I see a mix of folks. That's great. So we have some folks who are application developers, so the developer side of the house. We have some central teams. This could be platform, DevOps, infrastructure, others. We have some embedded DevOps, oftentimes that live with a line of business or live closer to the application team. So this is great. We've got a good representation from a number of different folks in different areas of the organization. Awesome. Great. I appreciate everyone jumping in there. Now, before we talk about solutions, let's talk about what most teams are dealing with, or most organizations are dealing with today. And really the challenge is, when you want to, for example, in this case, start a new service or new application, things that you have to think about, what are the things that you need to have? So when I was setting up new projects for myself back in my developer days, I'd have to think about things like my code repo. So I need to get a repo, and typically there's a team who's responsible for my SCM, whether that's GitHub or GitLab or Bitbucket or Harness or whatever that may be. Someone has access to set up a repo. Hopefully what they do is set up something that's not just empty, but is maybe even scaffolded with something that's relative to the work that I'm doing. But we need a repo. We need a Jira project potentially to plan and track our work. And again, that's a different owner who owns that. We may need infrastructure, so a dev environment that we can actually put this out in and test. And so the infrastructure team may need to get involved. There's probably going to be a variety of different systems and tools in place. This can be change management. It could be security scanners, all of these different things that I may need to have my project integrated into. And of course, at the end of the day, I need a CI/CD pipeline, something that's going to tie all of this together to give me the ability to say, all right, let me take the code that I'm working on and get it out into an environment so I can actually see it working and see if it's doing the things that I expect it to do. So How does that get delivered? I know when I did this, and I know this is still the case for many organizations, it's done through ticket ops. And we say ticket ops, but this really means any type of manual activity. So it could be opening one or more tickets. I was actually recently working with a customer who said that they, on average, open 72, I think, tickets to start a brand new service or a brand new project. But that's just one way. It could be emails, it could be Slack or MS Teams pings, it could be any number of different ways. But what you're looking to do is get a hold of all of these people who are involved in getting you, the application developer, all of those things that you need to get up and running. Now, ironically, some of these tickets are just asking someone to run automation that exists too. But all of this is done in pockets. It's coordinated manually. It's oftentimes slow, brittle. It leads to frustration from the end users who are waiting, oftentimes weeks or months to get all of the things they need to start developing. And it's still oftentimes better than the other option, which is, hey, every developer needs to figure this out on their own. That's never a good way of thinking about this, because developers have enough to think about. So we need to make sure that we lighten the load, that we have them focus on what they are good at, which is planning and delivering new features and capabilities and things like that, and not having the cognitive load of everything else that goes into making that happen. Now, I want to talk about the pipelines themselves. We talked about all the things that you need to get in order to be scaffolded and up and running. The pipelines themselves are a complicated piece of this puzzle. You have lots of different build languages. You have target stacks, different clouds, Kubernetes, serverless, you have traditional or legacy systems. Security often has to have a role in this as you try to get things into production. There's, of course, change management. There's process. There's governance. Lots of different things that make getting code into production very complicated. Now, few people know how all of this is supposed to work. And even with lots of pipeline YAML sitting in various repos, even using the proper pipeline, getting it configured correctly, making sure you're up to the latest standards, which are always evolving, it's complicated. It requires lots of handholding. That really drives us back to why things work today the way they do. It's all of those tickets, it's all of that tribal knowledge, and yet it still results in these inconsistent deliveries. It results in sprawl and drift of your pipelines from the latest standards, what really should be. And the obvious question is, why hasn't this all been solved yet? So the reason is, we have in a lot of organizations, we have documented standards, we have pipeline YAMLs sitting around in various repos owned by different teams. We have some disjointed automation. But again, that's not enough to solve this problem, right? So most teams, as we said, already have some automation in place. But the full process requires different teams that each do some work manually, have disjointed automation. At the end of the day, it's all slow, it's all cumbersome. It produces these pipelines that live as duplicated YAML, again, scattered in lots of repos, drifting out of date and out of compliance with the latest standards, requiring lots of upkeep, whether it's by the central teams, DevOps, platform, security, and others, or even worse yet, again, if we ask the developers to take on those tasks. And it's not just a problem of that initial output of the folks performing the onboarding tasks. So, one challenge is getting all that out there, getting everything configured and set up and initiated, but also the tools and platforms that are oftentimes used to do that end-to-end delivery really aren't designed for that central maintenance, aren't designed for the central updates and governance. And environments like this, even a small change can start to feel risky for developers. So, and even central teams, you're never really sure what copy of what you're changing and who that's going to impact, what's about to break. And in the spirit of that, I'd actually love to ask the second question we have here, which is going to be around, how you feel when potentially a change is needed in one of these pipelines. So if we can get that poll up and running. So what makes CI/CD changes feel risky for you today? Well, the one answer we don't have yet is I don't touch CI/CD unless I absolutely have to. So that means lots of folks here are touching CI/CD pipelines. And again, we have a variety of the other answers. Well, okay, now someone did chime in with that one, but people are working with, editing, copying YAML that they don't fully understand. They have to ask others before making changes. Some people think that it works fine, that the changes are low risk, which is great. But in general, we're getting a lot of responses with some of the other options as well. So, and that's a common thing. When we have to do this in a non-standard fashion, when we don't understand some of the things that we're that we're dealing with, like all of these different YAMLs, and when everything looks and feels different depending on repo, depending on service, depending on application, it makes it very tough to deal with. How do we keep with the latest standards? How do we make these changes without impacting negatively the application teams and what they're trying to deliver to the market? So now let's think about what this looks like when platform teams turn this automation into a product. We're actually going to now get into Harness internal developer platform. So Neely, if we can get the screen going here. Awesome, fantastic. So what we're looking here is we're looking at the Harness developer platform. Now the Harness internal developer platform is part of the Harness overall platform, which provides a number of different capabilities. Now, all of these capabilities can be individually consumed. So you don't have to buy Harness as a whole. But if, for example, you're looking to automate and standardize the onboarding of services as we're talking about today, plus any number of different other types of these self-service workflows, which we'll talk about at the end, you can go with the Harness internal developer portal. But of course, all of these things do work nicely together. So if you have multiple Harness products, it makes it even easier to bring all of this together to make it scalable, maintainable, give your end developers a great experience. Now, Harness IDP has a number of different developer-centric capabilities. But today we're going to be focusing, again, just on the self-service workflow. So I'm going to go ahead and go over here. And as I go into the self-service workflows, I have an easily discoverable menu of common needs, common asks. I think of this almost like a restaurant menu. So as opposed to walking in and like, what do you have? What can I do? How do I get something? There's a nice menu of here are your different choices. And I'll go through a lot of these a little bit later on, talking about the different types of use cases and things like that. But for the purposes of today and from a timing perspective, what I want to do is I want to look at one of our new service onboarding workflows, kick that off, and then we'll come back and look at some of the other capabilities or some of the other use cases in the platform here. So I'm going to search. There's lots of ways to get to what I want to. Again, we'll come back and talk about that in a bit, but I'm going to look for Spring Boot over here. That's a common pattern that we have here at Harness. So I'm going to go ahead and say, I want to scaffold a Java Spring Boot application. Again, something that's easily accessible by me as a developer. And I can come in here. I'm going to provide it a name. I'm going to call this dzone. One of the things you'll notice here is that I can support, and again, this is how I've designed or how we've designed this specific workflow, is different inputs that the user can provide us. Again, think of this as an item on the menu, and these are the customizations. So picking a burger, and maybe I want to add some cheese, and I want to hold the tomato, whatever else it is. But these are the different customization options. We'll talk about this in some more detail a little bit later. But I'm saying I want to use Harness both for SCM, and I have different choices. I've given a few of them, and as my build tool here. And as we go through this, maybe we are multi-cloud, so I can choose, hey, which cloud do I want to go to? Am I going to a containerized environment with Kubernetes, or maybe it's something else? Maybe I have different choices for database and caching systems. But again, this is all within the control of the platform team who would be setting this up to say, here are the standardized patterns that we want our developers to follow as much as possible. It doesn't have to be all the time, but as much as possible. And then let that be something easily discoverable and easily selectable as I'm doing here now. So I've made my choices. I'm going to go ahead and review this, and I'm going to go ahead and kick this off. So again, this would be in place of a bunch of ticket ops where I have to open up tickets, send emails, send Slack messages. Hey, is this done? Can you tell me where we are in the process and so forth? I select from the menu. I kick that off. And there's automation in the background that's actually delivering this to me. In fact, I can see exactly where we are within that automation here. Now, I'm going to come back and show the end result, what happened with this automation, what the end result is a little bit later. But let's go back to the workflows and talk about the various different use cases that we have here. Now, there's a number of different workflows that have been presented to me. So this, again, is that menu of all of the common things that we want to do. Again, today, we're really focusing on that scaffolding, which has a number of key areas. But again, that CI/CD pipeline is going to be core to that. But there's other things in here as well. So, I've actually seen that, this is now put into a nice category for me. This is all configurable by our customers, where they can come in and say, what types of common categories do we want to present to our end users? So here, for example, I have service onboarding and infrastructure, developer onboarding, day two operations, cloud operations, any number of different things, again, fully within the control of the platform team who is setting up this portal, this internal developer portal, and the self-service workflows for the use of the application developers. So again, whether you're talking about things like new service onboarding, new developer onboarding, infrastructure requests, access to systems, whatever else it is, all of those common things can be easily presented and easily discoverable to your end users. So they have one place to go. It gets rid of all that ticket ops, and it, again, results in that consistent delivery because we have automation in the back end to do that. Again, we have our categories over here. One of the things I think is really important, especially at larger organizations, is to make sure that you have a personalized menu. With Harness IDP, one of the things we can do is we can, from an RBAC perspective, a role-based access perspective, limit who has access to what. And that includes individual workflows here. So if, as an example, I'm in one part of an organization and there's certain things that are that make sense to me, different stacks, different application types, different languages, whatever else it is, I can get a menu of just those things. And if there's different teams or different organizations that have different needs, I don't necessarily need to see all of that. And that can become important because, again, this is all potentially extra cognitive load, and we don't want to do that. Again, going back to the analogy with the restaurant menu, if you've ever walked into one of those restaurants that has the 30-page menu, and you walk in, you're hungry, you already kind of think you know what you want, and then an hour later you're looking at the menu and you haven't made a decision. I see that as the potential challenge if you have hundreds, thousands of different automations or self-service workflows here in your catalog, many of them that are not relevant to you. So having a personalized menu can make sure you can quickly find the things that are related to you, not be bothered by all of the things that don't make sense to you in your part of the organization, so you can quickly get the things that you need done and not get overloaded. Now, how does this all get configured? We'll talk about this real quick, but all of these workflows and all of the different inputs, the different fields and all that, they're configured as YAML. So As an example, here's my scaffolding, my Java Spring Boot application. This is the definition of that. Now I have some basic information here, but if I go in the YAML, you'll see things like my project and repo details, my source code management, my build tool, my cloud providers, and all that. All of the different fields that I want presented to the end users can be easily defined here in YAML. There's a lot of advanced capabilities here. So as an example, these don't have to be hard-coded. I can go and grab information from third-party systems. Those can be cloud-based systems, SaaS systems. They could be even internal to an organization. We have a mechanism that allows us to access those behind the firewalls systems in a safe and secure manner without having to punch holes through firewalls and things like that. So easily grab information dynamically and present it to the user. You could do things like, a selection can impact what other selections are available. So this has a full immersive UI to make it very easy and enjoyable for the end user who comes in to select all of the things that are necessary for them and to continue on. Now, this is one part of the end-to-end for what self-service workflows do. It's the front end. It's how do we define the UI, the things, the menu that the users see, what choices they have, and so forth in them. But of course, there's going to be a second piece, which is how does this get delivered? Because at the end of this, it's a bunch of tickets, it's a bunch of manual steps. It's not really going to solve that problem. So if I switch to another tab over here, we're going to see the orchestration behind the scenes. And this is an important part of providing self-service capabilities, is having that full end-to-end automation, full end-to-end orchestration in a enterprise-grade orchestration engine, such as the one Harness provides here. Again, this comes with the IDP. So not only do you get to present the menu, the user interface, but you also have the full automation engine that has integrations into all of the different things that you would typically need to work with. This could be working with, for example, your infrastructure as code that may be setting up parts of what you need. It can integrate into change management, your ServiceNows, your Jiras, things like that. It integrates to your clouds. It integrates to your SCMs. It integrates to all of these different things and makes it very easy for the platform team to define the automation end to end. Remember earlier we talked about the fact that there's a Git repo and there's a team that owns that and knows how to potentially create that repo. There's a Jira project. There's pipelines, there's infrastructure, there's all of the security tools, all of these things that have to come together to allow the developer to actually get a build out into a dev environment and see something in progress. So this allows all of those things to come together. All of the integrations are here. It is an enterprise-grade orchestration system with governance, with audit, with role-based access, with integrations, with all those things that platform teams need to automate the delivery of these requests. Now, let's actually see, now that we've taken a little detour, the end result over here. So if you remember, I went ahead and asked for a new Java Spring Boot application, asked for it to be scaffolded. And the automation is now complete. It's gone through all of the different steps to deliver this to me. Happened within a few minutes. In this case, it took me about 5 minutes to get all this. Now think about this in the context of how things work today, which is for many of my customers measured in months, not even in weeks or days, but months. This is something that was delivered here in minutes. Now we had no manual steps in this. Maybe you have some approvals and things like that. That's okay. That can impact the overall time. But the idea is to minimize this as much as possible to give a really great experience to the end users, the developers, by turning this around as quick as possible. Now, let's actually look at the results of this. I'm going to go ahead and in Harness, I'm going to change my scope here my project. And if you see, the latest one in here is called the dzone service. If you remember, I entered dzone as the name here. And in dzone, I have pipelines. I have, if I go over here, I have services. The services represent the things that I'm deploying. I have environments, a dev, a production, a QA environment. I have infrastructure workspaces. So this can represent, again, my the infrastructure as code that represents my dev or QA environment. I have potentially a code repository that's already been scaffolded with all of the code that's relative to what I do. It's been scaffolded for me, so it's not just base code, but also takes in my inputs and so forth to give me a great starting point as opposed to a blank sheet of paper, and potentially even runs my first CI/CD pipeline. Now, as I mentioned before, we're using Harness here for all of these different capabilities. Harness does provide the end-to-end platform with all of the capabilities that we talked about before, but that's just an example. We didn't have to use Harness. We could have used any number of different systems along the way for infrastructure as code, for builds, for deployments, for whatever else may be necessary as part of your end-to-end process. I will say using the Harness platform does present a lot of benefits. So there's central governance via policy as code or OPA built in here. There's centralized and layered templating, which means that for the platform and DevOps teams that have to maintain, the long term, what's everyone running, and are they up to the latest standards and all? They can do it with little effort, and it removes all of the handholding potentially that the developers would need. And the end result of this is that Harness IDP and its self-service capabilities, the workflow capabilities, this really results in platform engineering as a practice, not tickets, not documentation, but a real product that the platform team can put in front of developers that they can rely on and that they can get a great experience from. Now, some key takeaways from what we've talked about here before we go into Q&A. So what we've seen here today is that Harness IDP self-service workflows replaces ticket ops, providing a great experience for developers where they can quickly discover all of the things that they need, request those things, again, whether it's services or developer onboarding or infrastructure, whatever it may be, and get those things delivered in an automated fashion so that they can be successful in their roles. Now, the self-service workflows also improves consistency and standardization across the organization. That's going to be key for those central teams, platform, DevOps, security, others like that, who care about not just the initial, but how do we maintain this over the next N years as things change and as we need to evolve. And while we've focused on Harness IDP and the workflow capabilities, we did talk about the fact that this is built on a platform that enforces governance, makes it easy for central teams to ensure that all of the latest standards, all of the latest processes are met, are complied to with little effort, which helps those teams, again, scale to the needs of the entire organization, as opposed to being in this reactive firefighting mode of how do I get this one team, that one team, another team up to date, because they're not at the latest. They drifted, they created their project years ago. They've drifted from the standards, and they're now potentially presenting risk to the organization. So with that, I'd love to turn it over to Neely and Bree to look at do a live Q&A. I don't know if there's any questions that have been presented from the audience at this point, but we can start to look at these. Awesome. So I see a question that's popped up in front of me.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was going to let you know there was one. Sorry. All right, there you
Absolutely. Great. The first question is, we already have a lot of pipelines in YAML. How hard is it to move to this model without rewriting everything? Great question. One of the first things I oftentimes get from organizations is, do we need to do a lift and shift? Do we need to bring over all of that? We have lots of different things and so forth. And I think a great way to start for organizations is to say, let's not focus necessarily on all of the existing pipelines and all of the existing systems that require lots of handholding and so forth. Because if we focused on them, we're going to spend all of our time just on maintenance, just on upkeep. We're never going to get to the next level. We're never going to improve or mature as an organization. So my recommendation is, let's start to present, and it doesn't have to be for everyone within the organization. Let's start to present some automation. It could be for just parts of the organization. It could be for just one pattern, one language, one deployment architecture, whatever else it is, but we'll start to standardize those. And as more teams start to consume those standardized workflows and the outputs of those standardized workflows, that means less maintenance over time. And that, of course, allows the teams to iterate and present more capabilities in an automated fashion. And then eventually, when they're not doing as much of the day-to-day, because lots of teams are being managed in an automated fashion, updated in an automated fashion, now you can go back and start to dig out some of the more archaic, some of the more traditional pipelines that need a lot of hand-holding. Great question on that one. I see a second question pop up here. How do you decide what should be standardized versus what teams should still control? That's also a fantastic topic. So as we saw, there's going to be some options that you want to give users. So when I go in here and I select something from the workflows, I had different options. You don't want to make it too rigid, right? You want to be able to support all the things that developers need, but within reason, right? So a sensible set of standards that we can use, but still that meet the developers' needs and all that. Now, that's one part of it. And by the way, those standards that you put in here, they may not work for everyone, but if you can focus on the 80-20 rule and say, let's get 80% of the organization over time covered by our standards. They work in standard patterns, in standard architectures, in standard deployment models, and so forth. Yes, there's going to be 20% that don't fit these models, and maybe the effort to automate all of that just isn't worth it. But at that point, again, the 80% is more self-managed, right? It's automated. It's the, keeping it up to date, making sure it's governed, making sure it's following latest standards is very easy. So that does give the platform teams, the infrastructure teams, the security teams, the ability to manage those, the other 20%, the ones who can't follow the processes or follow the standards in a more scalable way as well. So that's one aspect. A second aspect of this is that, and we didn't get into this much earlier, but when that pipeline or when all of the outputs of that self-service onboarding are delivered, one of those key things is going to be the end-to-end pipeline. And while we like to think about those pipelines as being something that we could fully standardize for everyone, the reality is you can probably standardize, again, 80-90% of it, but there's going to be unique things that each team needs. So the overall flow probably looks the same. And that's something that the platform team, the DevOps team, the central teams want to govern and manage. Like, this is the way we do delivery at whatever organization. Security, change management, advanced deployment strategies, de-risking, testing, like whatever else it is. Like this is the overall pattern, and that should be centrally managed. But again, there's going to be some unique things that each application team may need. And one of the things that Harness provides is a key capability. I haven't seen this anywhere else, called flexible templates. So that pipeline is delivered in a way that it's managed by the central teams. And again, if the standards change, if Today, we're creating deployment tickets in Jira to get sign-offs, and tomorrow we need to do it in ServiceNow. They can control all that. They manage it centrally. Everyone can automatically be the recipients of any updates they make, so we don't have to go and hunt down who's doing it the right way, who's doing it the old way, can you upgrade? It's all managed centrally. But with flexible templates, we can also let that central team, the DevOps or the platform team, say, hey, we understand that different consumers of our templates are going to have unique requirements somewhere within that process. Maybe after we open up our change ticket, Team A does one thing, Team B does something else. Maybe after we do a canary deployment, which is an out-of-the-box capability with Harness, we do testing, but Team A does one thing here, Team B does a different thing here, a different pattern. And flexible templates actually provides the ability for the overall flow to be managed by the central teams while still giving the unique capability of Team A does one thing here, Team B does something else here, to exist harmoniously together, right? So that means Team A and Team B are consumers. They've each put in their own unique needs into that flexible, into the usage of that flexible template. And when the platform team decides that there needs to be some kind of change because the standards have changed, because something else is going on within the organization, they can make that change and not impact the fact that Team A does something unique here and Team B does something unique here. And when Team A or B has a unique change that they need to make in those spots, they can do that without impacting the rest of the overall process, which is in the control of, in the governance of the platform teams, the DevOps team. So it's a key capability for how to scale without having sprawl, without having to copy all of these pipelines into, for Team A, for Team B, let them make the unique changes. And now you have the challenge of, well, it's no longer matching what the latest standards are. They made their copy a year ago. They made their changes a year ago. The central standard is updated and they're no longer following it. It gets rid of that entire thing and makes it harmoniously work together. Hopefully that helped answer that question. All right, our third question. Typically, pipeline code live in the code repo, meaning a developer could modify the pipeline, bypassing governance from the platform team. How is this handled with a platform like Harness? Great question. So we started talking about this a little bit with the templatization and things like that, but I didn't get into the details of where it lives. So in a platform like Harness, the templates, they live not in the code repo. They live completely outside of that, are maintained by the platform teams, by the DevOps teams. What the application developers get is a potential pipeline that's a full template or has templates of different pieces in there. And that, you have different choices, can live in the repo or can live outside, independent of the code repo, the application repo. However, regardless of where it stands, like where it sits and lives, between role-based access control, between flexible templates that say, hey, you're only allowed to do things in specific places, and between policy as code, which we really didn't get into, but can take it even a step further in terms of structure and governance, to make sure that all of your policies are enforced, not manually, but literally when someone goes and makes a change, all those policies are reevaluated to say, do they meet? So imagine, as an example, you have an end-to-end pipeline. There's an approval that needs to be received in ServiceNow before you go into production. And for whatever reason, we haven't templated that. We haven't made that part of the template. So it's kind of like its own step or its own stage within the pipeline. And at that point, maybe anyone who has access to the pipeline from an RBAC perspective, who has edit access, can go in and say, let's delete that approval. It's Friday night. I have something that needs to get into production. I want to go home. and I don't want to wait for this. So hit delete, and then they try to save that. Well, policy as code comes into play here and says, wait a minute, no. There's a non-negotiable policy we have that says you need to get an approval before you go to production, just as an example. And these policies can be anything. It could be for security purposes, for supply chain, for, again, the overall flow and approvals, governance, change management, all these different things. They can apply to the entire organization, or you may even have policies that are specific to one part. So this part of the organization has specific policies that don't necessarily apply here. This part has a different set of policies. So, and then there's a common set of policies for everyone. So Harness supports all those things. The end result, I think, goes to the question there, which is we can make sure that regardless of where the pipeline lives, the pipeline YAML, behind the scenes, of course, one of the things I forgot to mention earlier, there is YAML behind the scenes. We saw the nice visual representation, but there is YAML behind the scenes. That YAML, again, whether it lives in the application repo or not, it is strictly in granular controlled through role-based access controls, through those flexible templates, and through the policy as code engine. All right, next question. How is this different from just exposing pipelines or using self-service actions? Great question. So I would almost think about exposing pipelines as the current state. We actually do see a lot of this today where the onus is on the developers to figure out their own pipelines. So it doesn't happen in all organizations, but it does happen in some where that is thrust upon the developers. It's not a central team that manages and creates these pipelines. And then what they're usually given is like, hey, here's a repo of different pipelines, right? Go pick one. That's not a great solution, right? It's not easily discoverable. It's one part of the overall scaffolding process. As we talked about, it's everything that we've seen today wasn't just about the CI/CD pipeline. Of course, that's a core part of it, but of course there was the repo, there was the project, there is like all of these other things, the infrastructure and all that things that need to get delivered as well. And then with most systems out there, hey, you can say, here's a list of our latest and greatest pipelines. Great. Someone has to go figure out and decode like what makes sense for me and why should I choose this one? They make a copy of it into their own repo, which was the question we just got. So they copied over into their repo. And at that point, while they're potentially using the latest and greatest standards of how this should happen, there's now a disconnect. And when those latest and greatest standards change, now we have this issue of, well, who's using it, who's not using it, who's potentially putting us at risk because they're not using the latest and greatest standards. All of that goes away. So having a system like this that makes it easily discoverable, so people know where to go to be a good developer, a good corporate citizen, doing all the right things, that's a key piece of it. Having the full automation that gives you the end-to-end as opposed to just bits and pieces, that's a piece of it. All those things come together to make this a much more enjoyable process or experience for the developers, as well as something much easier for the central teams to manage, not just at that initial time, but over the life cycle of this service, where there's going to be lots of things that change over the years. Can this pattern really be used just for environments, or can it be other delivery workflows? Good question. So we didn't show it here. We touched on it with the different categories that we saw on the screen and so forth. So onboarding or scaffolding new services and environments is a very common one, but really this should be used as the one place developers go to make any type of requests for different things that they need. So whether it's onboarding people, whether it's onboarding services, whether it's creating new environments, that could be long-lived or ephemeral, because you need, an ephemeral environment for a specific project, a specific feature, a specific, branch, whatever else it is. or any of those other things that we talked about, access to systems, infrastructure, changes, any of those different things. This should be the IDP, or the developer portal with its self-service capabilities, should be that central point that developers go to for all of those needs, so they don't have to think about, well, if I'm onboarding a service, I go here. If I need a new environment, I go here. If I want access to a system, I go here. Developers have to context switch between too many tools already, and giving them more tools to have to switch between just makes it that much worse, right? At that point, people don't think about it. They have a hard time finding it. It kind of goes back into the current state of nothing is standardized, nothing is centralized, and it becomes chaotic. What does adoption actually look like for platform teams and developers? Good question. So each, of course, plays a different role here. The role of the platform teams from an adoption perspective is presenting again, over time, a wider set of standard patterns and things like that that they want to do, that they want to promote. I will say, as an example, working with a customer a couple of years ago, they had a desire to say, we've got chaotic environments. No two environments are the same. No two stacks are the same. No two targets are the same. And it makes for a security, observability, maintenance, just chaotic experience for those central teams. So their goal was to get to a handful of golden architectures, golden paths. And they went at it using a carrot and stick approach. The carrot is, hey, we're going to, as part of our journey here, onboard a number of standardized golden paths and golden architectures that we want people to use. Again, targeting that 80% rule that we talked about earlier. Now, as part of the carrot, they told their audience, the developers, if you can use one of these standard patterns, we're going to make life really easy for you. We're going to take care of observability, because it's easy to automate a standard set of things. We're going to take care of security, because it's easy to automate a standard set of architectures. We're going to take care of upgrades and maintenance. We're going to take care of all these things. And we'll give it to you, again, in minutes, hours, whatever else it is. You'll have access to it. You'll be up and running in no time. So that's the carrot. If you can fit into these, yeah, maybe you thought about one piece being slightly different, but all of these benefits that you can get if you can decide to use one of these things. It's fantastic. The stick is, well, we're not going to stop you from going outside of this. There's going to be 20% of use cases that are potentially not going to be met by these standard patterns. But then we're going to have to go through the regular process that we do today. There's going to be architectural design boards. There's going to be review boards. There's going to be the time it takes to go through that, which is oftentimes measured in months, right? So by the time we get this architecture approved and we can start setting things up for you, we're talking months down the road. And oh, by the way, because these things aren't standardized, it's a lot of work for the central teams to do monitoring and observability, to do security, to do upgrades, and so forth. So the onus goes back to you as an application team. This is the approach they took to get more and more people onboarded into their standard patterns. Now, of course, the question also said, what's that journey look like for the application developers? Well, they are given, right, the access. Usually this is something that's announced to the organization, like, hey, we've set up these common patterns. We're going to make it a really easy experience for you to onboard, to get access to different systems, this and that. And then, of course, we measure, there's data behind the scenes for all this. We measure usage and so forth to make sure that the adoption is high, that awareness is high, and so forth. But those types of approaches really help. They're good things to think about when the platform or central teams are thinking about how do we onboard into Harness, how do we onboard self-service workflows? What considerations do we have? And do we get adoption? And then the same, the other side of it for the developers, that great experience is going to give them a reason to go here as opposed to go with their kind of traditional approaches. Are there any other questions? All right, I don't see any others here. All right. Well, that's going to end our session today. I appreciate everyone being on and listening to how we can take self-service and turn the chaotic experience of what organizations go through today to the pleasure of what we can see with something like Harness IDP and the self-service workflows that it presents. Now, before ending, we have one last thing at the bottom of the screen here. There's going to be a link to a blog post. So if this is of interest to you, if this started to get you to think about, hey, is there a better way for us to present actions, requests to our end users, the application developers? Is there a better way for me as an application developer to get things that I need so I can do my job more effectively? If this has gotten your interest, there's a link at the bottom. It just popped up that goes to a blog post where you can learn more about Harness IDP, about self-service, about the way we think about how we turn platform engineering into an enjoyable product for those end users. With that, I will say thanks to everyone who's joined us today, and hope to hear from you shortly if this continues to be of interest and you want to learn more as well.